Short time ago, the Immigration Minister Chris Bowen joined me from Canberra. Chris Bowen, is this panel the equivalent of outsourcing your policy formulation?
No, not at all, Lee. What we're facing here is a situation where the Parliament has missed the opportunity to implement offshore processing legislation. Now, the government's had the benefit of expert advice for many months about the best policy options for eliminating the people smugglers business model. Now, we want a process where we can have that expert advice available to the whole Parliament, where we can have a fresh set of eyes come in and advise the whole Parliament on the best way forward. Clearly, the government has a preferred position here. Clearly, the government believes in the policy advice it's received, but clearly we've reached an impasse and a stalemate, and that just has to be acknowledged, and we need to move to the next step. So this is a move by the Prime Minister in good faith to work with the Parliament so we can get an outcome, and we can get one very soon.
What makes you think that a policy devised by this panel is any more likely to get through the Parliament than Rob Oakeshot's bill this week?
Well, look, it's a matter for others as to whether they accept the advice of the panel. But we think this is a genuine process. We think the Australian people want to see a breakthrough. This is a good opportunity in a transparent way for all the issues to be put on the table. There's a lot of myths and misconceptions, even amongst members of Parliament, about these policies, about what has worked in the past and what might work in the future. So let's get some very eminent and respected people, Angus Houston, respected, I would have thought, very clearly across both sides of the aisle. Paris Aristotle, likewise, not a household name perhaps in Australia, but somebody who would be deeply respected, I would have thought, on both sides of the parliamentary divide. And let's get people like that in a panel, going through the issues, advising the Parliament as a whole, the government, the opposition, the crossbenchers, as to what are the pros and cons of different policy approaches. And maybe, just maybe, we'll get a breakthrough here. We need a breakthrough, and we've got to take every opportunity to get a breakthrough.
Have you approached Scott Morrison or Tony Abbott in the past 24 hours to say, hey, how about we have a face-to-face meeting, sit down and try and sort this out?
Oh, look, we've been through that, Lee. We had several meetings last year.
But you've got to keep trying, though, don't you?
Well, we have been. Nobody could question how much the government has tried over the last 24 hours and 48 hours to get this through the Parliament.
But have you actually made a phone call?
Well, let's be clear about what's happened here, Lee, that we instigated discussions with the opposition last year. The opposition rejected those discussions, said they wouldn't have discussions unless we made quote-unquote, an offer. So we made an offer after deep consideration. That was a very substantial concession by the government. We said, look, we will open a detention centre on Nauru, not something which sits easily with many people in the Labor Party.
Sorry to interrupt you.
But we needed that breakthrough.
Sorry to interrupt you, but I don't want to go through ancient history. I want to try and talk about where we're going to go forward. No, I want to know,
I agree, Lee.
Don't you think that most Australians would expect our political leaders to be able to keep sitting down, discussing this face-to-face until you can come up with something that is mutually acceptable?
Yes, I do.
Well, so
I agree with you.
How come you haven't made a phone call in the past 24 hours?
Well, what we've done, Lee, is we've made many offers over the last 24 hours very publicly to the Leader of the Opposition that we are happy to meet, that we're happy to talk these issues through. Now, this issue from Mr Abbott, the Prime Minister hasn't called me. I mean, it's Year 7 stuff. I mean, it's like pass me a note at recess stuff. The offer has been clear and the offer has been there. And not only that, the government has made substantial concessions and attempts at compromise. The opposition has moved not 1 centimetre. The only change we've seen from the opposition was a change yesterday, which was designed not to get legislation through, but a change, in fact, designed to do the opposite, to stop one of their members of Parliament voting for the legislation. Do politicians think that Australians really buy this pantomime that your side is right all the time and the other side is always wrong? No, I don't. And that's not what we're saying. In fact, we're saying the opposite, Lee. What we've said is this, very clearly. We think Malaysia's the right policy. The opposition disagrees. The opposition says Nauru's the right policy. We disagree. Well, let's move on. Let's move on. Let's do both.
OK, well, let's move on. Surely trying Nauru on its own is better than nothing, which is where we're at now. No,
I don't accept that. And I'm happy to go through that, Lee. I mean, there's a reason why all the expert advice to us has been that Nauru would not work as a standalone deterrent. Why? Because it's been tried before. What happened before? Boats kept coming. Nauru got so full that they then had to open Manus Island as well. And the worst maritime disaster with an asylum seeker vessel this nation has seen, Civex, the loss of 353 men, women and children, occurred while Nauru was open and operating. I do not accept for 1 second the myth by the Liberal Party that opening Nauru would stop drownings at sea, because we've seen it before. We saw 353 souls perish while Nauru was open. We do have all the expert advice
coming now than over that period. Let's look at Labor's record on this since forming government in 2007. There was the dismantling of offshore processing, then there was the Go Nowhere East Timor solution, then the re-embracing of offshore processing, then the Malaysia solution overturned by the High Court, and now we have this current predicament. The only reason we're currently in this situation is because of Labor's mismanagement, isn't it?
Well, no, obviously I don't accept that characterisation, Lee, and you just said you didn't want to go through ancient history, you want to talk about moving forward, and I'm happy to move forward.
Tell me that you've done a good job when I've just listed that string of things.
Well, no, in the time that we've been dealing with these issues, we've seen a very significant increase in asylum seekers around the world, and we can go through the pros and cons of the Pacific so-called solution. We can go through why all the expert advice to us is that it would not work if re-implemented now, because it was simply a Christmas Island further away. We can go through how, when temporary protection visas were introduced, the number of boats arriving in Australia actually went up in the 2 years following, despite some of the myths we hear about temporary protection visas. I've just run through the experience of Nauru, including Civex, with the loss of 353 people and Nauru being full. We can go through that, but I think the Australian people are frankly sick of that discussion and sick of that debate. Yes, we've been frustrated by the Parliament. Of course we have. Governments do get frustrated by Senates from time to time. But we do need a breakthrough in this impasse. That's why the Prime Minister has made this good faith step today to try and take some of the politics out, get the expert advice front and centre in the debate, and hopefully the Parliament and the Australian people can get the policy settings we need to stop people dying at sea, and we can finally resolve this issue.
Chris Bowen, thank you very much.
Thank you, Lee.